Have you ever hired someone and thought, how do they not know this? Basic stuff. Or maybe it's somebody already on your team. Maybe you've even caught yourself thinking, generation whatever is the problem. Well, today we're talking about what's actually going on. Welcome to Let's Get Rash. This is the podcast that says what your boss won't and what your employees wish they could. Work sucks today because leadership sucks and no one wants to say it out loud. I'm Jessica, a former insider turned leadership coach and the author of Let's Get Rash About Leadership. I'm not here to be nice, I'm here to be real. Let's get rash about it. The real problem in the world today is inconsistent training. Years ago, when an employee was hired, they usually came with kind of like the basic stuff that was already built in. The fundamental workplace courtesies, you know what I mean? See, it didn't matter whether they had 20 years of experience or none at all. There was a basic understanding and certain expectations that people just understood. Today, bosses are pulling their hair out because employees can seem so far removed from what used to be considered normal workplace behavior. To many bosses, employees are coming across as dense, entitled, lazy, and disrespectful. Why? Because the workplace that taught those fundamentals barely exists anymore. Right now in the workplace, there are a lot of bad examples floating around, and I mean a lot. Employees, new and experienced, are being shaped by completely different standards depending on where they came from. And instead of recognizing this and teaching through correction, we've just defaulted to, people just don't get it anymore. They're so lazy. No one wants to work these days. And in a lot of cases, we've turned this into a generational war. But that's not it, not even close. Just hear me out. The real issue is that we still have two completely different leadership mindsets running in business, and employees are stuck in the middle getting mixed signals from both of them. Employees are behaving exactly how they were trained by whatever leadership environment that they were in last. Not by work in general, not by common sense, but instead by a specific manager at a specific job with specific expectations. So when they show up to your workplace, they're not starting from zero, they're starting from somewhere else entirely. Let me give you just a tiny example. My first office job was over 20 years ago. Within the first week, I transferred a call over to my very direct supervisor and said something like this. Hey, you have a call on line 1. My boss said, who is it? I said, I don't know, I didn't ask. And he said, pretty disgusted, you didn't ask? You need to ask that every time. In that moment, I felt like a fool because, of course, duh, that should have been so obvious. And that stuck with me. And I never transferred another call without knowing who was on the other line ever again. Fast forward, many years later, different job, different boss. Months went by of me answering the phone with an earshot of my boss and saying this every time. Absolutely, may I tell them who's calling? One day my boss says, while the person is waiting on hold, please stop that. That's so rude. Don't ask them who's calling. What? Same behavior, two completely opposite expectations. And the problem is, nobody ever explains the rules. You learn them by crossing them, and most of the time, it's when you've went way over the line and walked into a completely different room. So from the outside, it looks like the employee is clueless, like they have no idea what they're doing. Idiot. But really, the standards changed for them, and nobody's resetting it. See, employees are behaving according to whatever leadership environment trained them last, or whatever environment failed to train them at all. And that's where a lot of these workplace frustrations are coming from. It's not bad people, but just massive misunderstandings. So let's talk about some of the most common ones that employers complain about today. Time off, or PTO. This is where confusion really shows up in the workplace, so let's talk about it. Employees are coming from very, very completely different systems now. A lot of their previous employers have encouraged them to use their paid time off freely, or maybe their previous system was just, hey, put it on the calendar whenever you want to use it. So now, many employees think that using their PTO is largely at their discretion, and that submitting a leave request is just some kind of formality. A leave request where the word request is completely silent. See, for years now, the bigwigs at companies have pushed slogans like, use your PTO, mental health matters here, and take care of yourself, while also removing all of the direct communication between managers and employees. employees have started viewing PTO less like operational scheduling and more like personal entitlement that they independently control. Many employees' mindset is, this is my paid time off, I can use it whenever I want to. But most bosses operate like this. You should already know that's not how this works here. See, both sides think that it's obvious, but neither side is aligned. So now, as a boss, if you do deny time off, you hear this. I'm going on a trip and I already bought the plane tickets. Employees, listen up. A leave request is not a notification. It's not a demand and it's not a guarantee. A leave request is exactly that, a request. It can be approved or denied. The issue here is not about entitlement, it's a lack of shared definition. And this is fixable, but only if leadership actually defines it clearly. Another common complaint from employers is calling out sick. First of all, nobody is actually calling in sick anymore at all. Everybody's texting, and honestly, if you're a boss and you want to reduce casual call-outs, requiring an actual phone call instead of a text will absolutely rectify that issue. But that's not the main point that I'm getting at here today. The bigger issue is this. Have you actually read some of the messages that employees send when they can't make it in? You're going to hear stuff like this. Not coming in today, emergency. Or, car broke down, I won't be in. Or, hey, I'm sick, I'll let you know if I'm coming in tomorrow. Half of you listening will hear nothing wrong with those messages, and the other half will immediately hear the problem, and that is exactly the point that I'm making here. For me personally, when someone calls in sick, I expect a level of professionalism that sounds respectful, something that at least feels like they understand they're affecting the team, almost like they're seeking an approval, yes. And I don't care if people think that that's a power thing, because it's not. It's about respect. Just like if you ditch out on your buddy's barbecue this weekend, you don't send a text that says, not coming. That's what a lot of employers feel like is missing today, respect. It's not always about the absence itself that frustrates them, it's the delivery, the tone, the feeling that the employee doesn't even recognize the inconvenience their absence is creating for the rest of the team. But here's where it gets interesting. A lot of bosses don't want that at all. I actually talked to people in my own circles about this, including a boss who's older than me, and she actually said it drives her crazy when employees ask permission to call in sick. She said, and I quote, "It pisses me off when my staff asks me if they can stay home sick. They're adults. I'm not their mother. Don't ask me for permission. Just tell me you're not coming in." And here again, completely different expectations from one leader to another. So employees are trying to navigate these standards that are all over the place. So maybe employees aren't doing it wrong. They're guessing the tone based on past experience. The real issue is that most companies never actually define this. What does a proper call-out look like here? What level of details are expected here? We require a notification or a request. See, without clarity, everyone just fills in the blanks differently, and that's the problem. Let's talk about email. You know how when you get an email, your device gives you a notification? Most of us get it on both our computer and our phone. So technically, you've already been notified twice for the same email. Seems sufficient, right? It is for me. But apparently it's not, because now every email is followed up with a text message, a Teams message, maybe even a live human being standing in your doorway the second they hit send asking, "Hey, did you see my email?" Why the hell is this happening? Why is this happening now? Because somewhere along the line, enough people stopped responding to emails that now nobody trusts emails anymore. So today we get to all operate with communication anxiety. And this is another example of employees and employers being trained differently. For a lot of us older folks, email was introduced as the backbone of our work communication. It was basically like a running checklist. Your day was not done until your inbox was handled. An unread email means unfinished business. But that's not how everybody has been introduced to work communication. A lot of newer workplaces have trained employees that chat apps are the priority, texts are urgent, and leaving email completely optional. Now, some companies have created this problem themselves by piling on so many communication platforms that nobody now knows which one matters anymore. So managers are frustrated that employees are ignoring their email, rightfully so, while employees are sitting there thinking, if it was important, wouldn't you have messaged me about it too? Sent me a text? Do you see the new routine that we've accidentally created here? The new routine, email someone, then send them a message about the email, then follow up to make sure they saw the message about the email. It's asinine. Let's talk about the 2-week notice and why it's disappearing. Employers are frustrated, and again, rightfully so, because a lot of employees today just quit on the spot. They don't give any notice at all. But let's talk about how we got there. In a lot of companies, maybe even your own, employees who do give 2 weeks notice are immediately told, don't worry about it, today can be your last day. Go on. Sometimes the company has already been planning to fire this person and they're using the resignation as an easy exit. But most of the time, it's an emotional reaction from leadership. Ego has gotten involved. Ego gets involved. Feelings get involved. I've seen it with my own eyes. Either way, employees notice it. And over time, people learn, hey, giving notice will probably cost you 2 weeks of pay, so screw that, I ain't risking it. See, that's a real risk for a lot of people. They can't afford a surprise 2-week gap while they're waiting for their next job to start. So now bosses are angry that people don't give notice, while employees are scared to give it. Again, mixed signals. The 2-week notice has been around forever. It's customary. It's meant to show professionalism and respect on both sides. It's kind of the golden handshake of departing. It's the employee's way of saying, hey, I'm leaving, but I'm going to do it professionally. I'm going to give you the time to prepare instead of just leaving you holding the bag. If employers want that standard to continue, then we all have to help protect it. If someone gives proper notice and there's no major issues, let them work through their notice period. Make that expectation known, because once employees believe giving notice will get them punished, the system has started to train people not to do it anymore. Let's talk about personal phone use. The other day, I was at the grocery store. I had to wait while the cashier was on her phone next to the register, probably finishing up a personal text message. Now, I'm not saying that I know exactly what she was doing. Maybe it was work-related. Maybe it wasn't. But that's the point. I can't be certain. And that's the issue. Because in a lot of workplaces, employers have intentionally or not given symbolic permission for constant phone use. People are expected to respond on their phones all day long, communicate through chat apps, and then text updates or clock in and out. So the message becomes pretty unclear. Hey, use your phone for work communication all day long, but also don't be distracted by your phone. And then we act surprised when employees are constantly on their phones at work all day. See, those signals don't match, and people tend to follow the environment that they're given, not the one we assume we created. Let's talk about working while you're sick. I come from a work background that didn't look too kindly on calling in sick. In most of my jobs, it kind of mattered if I wasn't there, and it also screwed over my coworkers. So like a lot of people, I worked through colds, sickness, because unless I was retching, I showed up. Then COVID changed everything. It reset a lot of expectations around illness and staying home. But here's the thing, I still notice myself kind of operating with the old mindset. In my mind, a head cold doesn't automatically mean that I'm incapable of working. Meanwhile, today's workplace has shifted so hard in the opposite direction, now people cough once and everyone starts side-eyeing them like they're carrying the plague. So now we've created this really strange middle ground. In very few environments, employees are still expected to push through everything, but in most others, they're encouraged to go home at the first sign of anything. Now, this is one of those topics where most bosses, whether they admit it or not, they quietly do agree with me. But in today's workplace, we're all forced to perform this idea that unless someone feels perfectly fine, they are unable to work. We care. Surprise, surprise, any workplace standard that's vague or inconsistently enforced will get exploited. Shocking, right? See, not by everyone, but by the people who are already looking for soft spots in your company. And once that starts happening, it doesn't stay hidden. It becomes pretty obvious. Have you ever noticed that the same handful of people always seem to have the most unfortunate timing when it comes to sickness, availability, and commitment? Meanwhile, your reliable employees see that immediately. And here's where the real damage happens. Not with the missed time, but with the resentment that builds up with the people carrying the weight and watching others operate under a completely different set of expectations. Eventually, it stops being about sick days at all. It becomes about fairness, standards, and whether effort actually matters in your workplace. The point that I'm trying to make with this entire episode is that interpretation is always off everywhere, especially in the workplace. Because of that, I have to add a disclaimer here saying that I'm not a complete monster. Of course, if you're truly sick, there's no shame in staying home. And I'm not talking about people with serious illness or legitimate medical conditions. I think we know who I'm talking about. I'm also not going to sit here and draw a line and give numbers on what is acceptable and what is excessive, but I will say this. If you genuinely do not understand what excessive looks like in a workplace context, then you should probably remove yourself from the workplace and give that job opening to one of the millions of people who need a job right now. If you happen to be one of the bosses who quietly agrees with me on this subject, then at the very least, can we acknowledge the difference between effort levels? Because there is a real distinction between someone who shows up, contributes, and pushes through on a normal off day, and then someone who defaults to stepping out at every first sign of discomfort without even considering the impact. That's all I'm saying. All right, let's talk about micromanagement, and let's define this properly once and for all. Many years ago, a coworker once told me that our new boss was a micromanager, so I asked for examples. He said, he walks the halls 5 minutes after start time just to make sure everyone is at work. Wow, what a dirtbag, what a jerk, right? Imagine that, a boss expecting people to be at work when work starts. I got news for you, bud. That's not micromanagement, that's called accountability. And somewhere along the way, we started labeling any boss who enforces basic standards as a micromanager. So can we finally reset this definition? And this isn't just my personal opinion, these are facts. Micromanagement is not expecting people to be on time. It's not expecting work to be done correctly. It is not following up on deadlines. It's not asking for updates. It's not correcting mistakes. It's not enforcing standards. That's just management. Micromanagement is when a leader stops managing outcomes and they start trying to control execution. It looks like this: controlling exactly how tasks are done, dictating the exact process, the wording, or the order of work, requiring approval for minor decisions that should be owned by the employee, insisting on being CC'd on every frickin' email, constant unnecessary check-ins, redoing employees' work just because it's not their way, watching people so closely that they can't operate independently. That's micromanagement. And the problem is that we've stretched the word so far that it's lost its meaning. Now it just looks like a label for any leader that someone doesn't like or doesn't agree with. So we end up in a situation where the people actually dealing with the real control issues aren't being taken seriously anymore because the word has been so diluted to mean any leadership that I don't like instead of what it actually is. The same thing has happened with the word narcissist. We've overused that word to the point where it's become meaningless. Not every difficult boss has some personality disorder. Stop. Sometimes they're just difficult. We used to call them assholes, and then we moved on. Now everything is a diagnosis. So sensible people are left decoding everything, trying to figure out if the label actually fits the person or if the person speaking to us just doesn't have the language to describe what's actually going on. The problem with all of this is that when every label applies to everyone, it applies to no one. If you're a boss right now and your staff has to clean once in a while, good old-fashioned cleaning, how's that going for you? Is anyone just noticing and doing it without being asked? Or are you stuck repeatedly reminding grown adults that a shared space has to be maintained? Is the trash can in the common area overflowing while everyone walks past it like it's invisible? And somehow they still manage to add their wrapper to the top of it? The question is, why does this happen? It's not that employees were born thinking that they're above cleaning. It's that workplaces have spent years sending mixed signals. Job descriptions have played a role in that too. So does outsourcing. Over time, a lot of cleaning responsibilities have been removed from the employees and handed over to cleaning crews. So whether intentional or not, the symbolic message has become, this is not a part of your role. We would never expect you to clean. We would never ask you to do something so demeaning like clean up after yourself. You are far too important for that. A lot of employees can't even seem to take their own trash out of their office anymore. So fast forward to when that system breaks down or isn't available at all, cue the, that's not my job description. They don't pay me to clean. I'm not doing that. And then bosses look around at each other, scratching their head going, why are people not going above and beyond anymore? How did they get so entitled? What a mystery. And I'm already one step ahead of you because I can hear what you're going to say. Jessica, you don't understand the numbers. A cleaning contract is much cheaper and far more efficient than employees doing it. Wrong. What your team is missing out on isn't just cost efficiency. It's the expectation shift that happens when no one is ever responsible for basic upkeep anymore. Because when employees are never asked to maintain the very space they work in, clean up the very mess they made, you lose two things. First, the small moment of shared ownership like a Friday reset where everyone actually contributes to the environment they actually operate in. And second, the symbolic message that it sends. When everything is outsourced, it quietly reinforces the idea that that's beneath us. So then as a boss, when you do need people to step in, you're not asking for help, you're asking them to undo a mindset that's already been built. And that's where the mixed messages show up again. Job descriptions. In my social circle and honestly around the world, that's not in my job description. I started hearing that in the early 2000s. I heard it from all kinds of workers, even people in the military. And it wasn't always said formally. It was more like code for, I'm not doing that because I don't believe I'm required to do that. So it's kind of ironic that companies have created job descriptions to bring clarity, structure, and consistency, but over time, employees have weaponized them against the employer. And that's part of why you hear things like, no one goes above and beyond in today's workplace. It made me think, where did this whole concept really come from? And what problem was it trying to solve? A big part of this traces back to Frederick Winslow Taylor in the late 1800s. He's considered the father of scientific management, or Taylorism. Scientific management. Ugh. Two words that feel like they really should cancel each other out. His theory was basically this: work can be studied, broken down, and optimized like science. He studied mostly factories, and his approach focused on a few key ideas. Break work into specific tasks instead of vague roles. Find one best way to do each task. Standardize everything so it's repeatable. So managers design the work and then employees perform it. And then most importantly, and listen closely, train workers to follow the system, not improvise. Now, Taylor didn't create job descriptions as a formal HR document. That came later. But modern job descriptions are built directly out of that way of thinking. So here's the question that I keep coming back to. If most workplaces are still operating on the foundation of Taylorism, and especially that last principle, follow the system, don't improvise, then where exactly is the space for going above and beyond? Where is the allowance for doing anything outside of what's defined? And if everything is tightly defined on paper, where is the incentive to do more than the minimum required? And while I have you here, incentive doesn't always mean pay. Sometimes it's just recognition, maybe a compliment, being told, hey, good job, that actually made a difference. Now, I talk about this subject a lot, and I'm going to keep talking about it because the above and beyond cannot exist without initiative. And if initiative is constantly discouraged or micromanaged or shut down, then you don't get above and beyond. You get compliance. Now, some employees are never going to go above and beyond, ever. They're perfectly content operating at the bare minimum, and that's a reality in any workplace. But there are also people who are naturally inclined to step up. I'll put myself in that category. I am an above and beyond kind of person, but I also know how quickly that mindset can be shut down if the workplace doesn't support it. Because without initiative, there is no above and beyond. And in most workplaces structured directly or indirectly around Taylorism, you have to assume that people have been trained by the systems that reward compliance over creativity. In a way, we've been conditioned out of taking initiative. So unless you clearly signal that initiative is not only allowed but expected, it's probably not going to show up. And that's where the gap forms between what leaders think they're asking for and what employees think is actually safe to do. So today we've gone over a handful of mixed signals, and there's plenty more where that came from. The bigger point is this. Most of the frustration in workplaces isn't coming from lack of effort, it's coming from a lack of alignment. Expectations are kind of implied, assumed, or inherited from past systems, but rarely reset. And when that happens, people aren't actually operating under the same rules, they're just operating under what they think the rules are. So tailor those conversations to your standards. Be explicit, be direct, remove the guessing. Because at the end of the day, employees don't just need rules, they need your version of what acceptable actually looks like in your workplace. And remember, we all know what assuming does. For the younger crowd, it makes an ass out of you and me. It's like assume, A-S-S-U-M-E, it's a spelling thing. Anyways, if you're confused what I do here, I teach bosses how to boss so employees stop quitting in droves. My approach is obviously a little unorthodox because I also talk about the employee's perspective. The employee's perspective is a voice that's usually not invited into these conversations. And yes, that makes it a bit risky for me because I'm getting rash with the very people that I'm trying to connect with, the employers. That's not the typical move in leadership coaching, which usually avoids this perspective entirely. And for the record, my goal is not to say that every employee should be happy at all times. That's not reality. Some employees on your team probably shouldn't be there at all. That's also a part of leadership, making those decisions and setting those standards. But once we're honest about all of that, we can actually talk about what's driving a lot of the frustration on both sides without pretending it only exists in one direction. Thanks for listening to this episode of Let's Get Rash. Please like, subscribe, comment, GIF, all those types of things. Let me know what you think. And truly, from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate your support more than I can ever put into words. Have a great day.